Welcome to Liberty Voice USA, where we cut through the noise of partisan spin to deliver the unvarnished truth about the forces shaping our democracy. In a world where political narratives are crafted like Hollywood scripts, our mission remains simple: to arm you with facts, expose the manipulations that undermine our institutions, and remind us all that real power lies not in the hands of the elite, but in the informed vigilance of everyday Americans. Today, we dive into a story that's rippling through Washington like a stone skipped across still water. One that questions not just one man's fortune, but the very integrity of the bridges we build between nations and the shadows they cast at home. It starts in the marbled halls of Congress, when Representative Jasmine Crockett, the fierce Democrat from Texas, known for her unyielding pursuit of accountability, stepped to the podium in a routine oversight hearing last week. What unfolded wasn't routine at all. With a stack of documents in hand, redacted ledgers, wire transfer records, and memos from shadowy offshore entities, Crockett laid bare a trail of money that winds from the opulent palaces of Riyadh straight into the private vaults of Jared Kushner. We're talking about $2 billion, folks. Not a campaign donation or a policy grant, but a colossal infusion of Saudi cash into Kushner's fledgling investment firm Affinity Partners, funneled through layers of secrecy that would make even the most seasoned tax attorney pause. And Crockett didn't just mention it, she dissected it, piece by painstaking piece, forcing the room and the nation to confront a question we've skirted for years. When does influence peddling cross into outright corruption?
To understand the weight of this moment, we have to rewind to the Trump years, when Kushner, then a senior White House advisor and Donald Trump's son-in-law, became the architect of America's most intimate embrace with Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS as he's often called. Kushner wasn't just a diplomat, he was a confidant, jetting off to the kingdom for late-night strategy sessions, brokering deals that reshaped Middle East alliances while overlooking the brutal realities of Saudi governance, the crackdowns on dissent, the shadow over the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Remember that? The Washington Post columnist lured to a consulate in Istanbul, dismembered by state agents, all while U.S. intelligence penned the order squarely on NDS. Yet under Trump, Kushner downplayed it, even as he pushed for arms sales and economic pacts that poured billions into Saudi coffers. It was a relationship built on mutual convenience. America got oil stability and a bulwark against Iran. The Saudis got a fast track to legitimacy on the world stage. But what happens when the advisor becomes the investor? That's where the story turns from policy to peril. Fast forward to January 2021. Trump leaves the White House, and Kushner, with no prior track record in high-stakes private equity, incorporates Affinity Partners the very next day. 6 months later, the Saudi Public Investment Fund, PIF, the kingdom's sovereign wealth behemoth, controlled directly by MBS, wires in $2 billion. That's not pocket change. It's the single largest external investment that fund has ever made in a U.S. firm, dwarfing commitments to established giants like Uber or Lucid Motors. Internal PIF advisors balked at the deal, memos later revealed, warning that Kushner's firm lacked the experience or assets to justify such a gamble. One email leaked to the New York Times captured the skepticism. This is a bet on a name, not a portfolio. Yet the money flowed anyway. No questions asked, no performance benchmarks attached. Kushner himself brushed it off in a 2024 interview, calling MBS a visionary leader and the Saudis one of the most prestigious investors in the world. Visionary, perhaps, if your vision includes rewriting ethics rules on the fly.
But Crockett's revelation takes this from eyebrow-raising to outright alarming. In her hearing testimony, she didn't rely on speculation. She waved the receipts, literally. "These aren't whispers from anonymous sources," she said, her voice steady as she flipped through pages of transaction logs. "These are bank statements from Cayman Islands shells, routed through Dubai intermediaries, landing in U.S. accounts tied to Kushner's network.
$2 billion laundered, not in the criminal sense, but in the artful dodge of disclosure. She traced the path. Saudi funds enter Affinity not as a clean equity stake, but splintered across opaque limited partnerships, some registered in tax havens with zero public reporting requirements. One transfer, dated August 2021, clocked in at $750 million alone, coinciding eerily with Kushner's quiet lobbying for relaxed U.S. sanctions on Saudi human rights abuses. Another chunk, $1.2 billion, vanished into advisory fees for unnamed consultants whose addresses loop back to addresses linked to Trump family allies. Crockett paused there, letting the silence hang like a verdict. You can hide money in spreadsheets, but you can't hide the pattern. This isn't investment, it's insurance. A premium paid to ensure that the favors of yesterday echo into the policies of tomorrow. What makes this exposure so visceral isn't just the numbers, though $2 billion could fund universal pre-K for a decade or rebuild crumbling infrastructure in a dozen Rust Belt towns. It's the hypocrisy it unmasks, the double standard etched into our political DNA. Imagine for a moment if this were Hunter Biden, if a Democratic advisor, fresh from the Oval Office, pocketed billions from a foreign autocrat he'd cozied up to on taxpayer dime. The airwaves would erupt in special counsels and impeachment fever. Fox News would run wall-to-wall chyrons screaming pay to play. Yet with Kushner, the response has been a collective shrug from one side of the aisle, a murmur of business as usual from the other. House oversight, under Republican control since 2023, launched a probe back in 2022, but let it fizzle into footnotes. Even James Comer, the committee chair who once thundered about Biden family dealings, admitted last year that Kushner had crossed the line of ethics, but stopped short of subpoenas, calling it a legitimate business after the fact. Legitimate? When the line between public service and private profit blurs into invisibility.
Crockett didn't let that slide. Drawing on her roots as a civil rights attorney, she wove in the human cost, the way this gilded secrecy erodes the trust that binds us. Power was meant to serve the people, she told the hushed committee room, echoing the words of founders who warned against entangling alliances. But what happens when it becomes a shield for those who play by different rules? When diplomacy is just a veil for deals that line pockets while leaving principles in the dust? She invoked Khashoggi again, not as a footnote, but as a ghost at the feast. The journalists whose brutal end Kushner helped paper over, even as he texted MBS congratulations on great work the day after the murder. If we can ignore a man's life for a barrel of oil, what won't we ignore for a billion-dollar wire? Her words landed like measured thunder, prompting gasps from aides and a hasty recess call from the chair. Within hours, the clip went viral, amassing millions of views, not because of bombast, but because it pierced the armor of indifference. Everyday Americans, scrolling through feeds clogged with election noise, saw a mirror held up to the machine, a reminder that the scandals we decry in others are the ones we enable in our own backyard. And let's be clear, this isn't ancient history gathering dust in some congressional archive. With Trump eyeing a 2024 comeback that feels all too imminent in 2025's fevered landscape, the stakes pulse with urgency. Affinity Partners hasn't just sat on that Saudi windfall, it's deployed it, snapping up stakes in Israeli tech firms and Gulf real estate, all while Kushner whispers in Mar-a-Lago earshots about deal-making 2.0. Bloomberg's analysis last year pegged the fund's returns as middling at best, yet the cash keeps flowing from Riyadh, a tacit nod to the leverage Kushner still wields. Crockett's documents suggest more. Undisclosed side deals perhaps, where advisory roles mask ongoing influence ops. One memo she revealed outlined contingency planning for U.S. policy shifts, code perhaps for buying favors in a potential second Trump term. It's the kind of revelation that doesn't just shock, it sobers. In a democracy frayed by inequality, where one family's access to power can eclipse the voices of millions, this is the rot we ignore at our peril.
Yet, amid the outrage, there's a thread of hope in Crockett's stand, a reminder that accountability isn't a relic, but a muscle we must flex. She's no lone crusader. Her testimony has reignited calls from groups like CREW and the Project on Government Oversight for a full ethics committee review, complete with sworn depositions and asset freezes if impropriety is proven. Bipartisan murmurs are stirring too, even a few GOP moderates whispering about optics in private. But true change demands more than murmurs. It requires us, the public, to demand transparency laws with teeth, mandatory divestitures for ex-officials, public registries for foreign-linked funds, and end to the revolving door that spins officials into lobbyists overnight. Crockett nailed it when she closed her remarks. This isn't about left or right. It's about right and wrong. You can't preach integrity abroad while auctioning it at home. And if standing for truth costs everything, then I've already been paid in full by the oath I took to this country. As the hearing adjourned and cameras swarmed, Crockett didn't bask in the spotlight. She gathered her files, nodded to colleagues, and walked out into the D.C. drizzle, a quiet figure against the storm she'd unleashed. It's moments like these that reaffirm what democracy demands, not blind loyalty to leaders, but fierce fidelity to principles. We are a nation built on the audacity to question power, to shine light where shadows profit. Jared Kushner's story isn't unique, it's symptomatic, a symptom of a system where wealth whispers louder than justice unless we amplify the truth. Let this be our wake-up. In the battle for America's soul, silence is the real betrayal. We owe it to Khashoggi's memory, to the taxpayers footing the bill for these entanglements, to every American dreaming of a government that serves rather than sells, to hold the line. Stay tuned, stay aware, and stay truthful. This is Liberty Voice USA, where facts speak louder than politics.